Ah, Great Britain. Home to royalty, great sci-fi, fish and chips, and more movie bad guys than you can shake a scepter at. While we here in the United States have had a checkered past with our cousins across the pond, we've come a long way since 1776. Nowadays, we gladly accept parts of their culture into our lives, whether that be geeking out over the royal family, Doctor Who, or drinking tea. Over the years, I've watched a lot of British television. Currently, I'm a big fan of Victoria, a period drama about, well, Queen Victoria. I've been a Doctor Who fan for years now and occasionally pop in to watch America's Got Talent just because Simon Cowell. It's a small wonder that I watch a bunch of British TV. My dad's been watching it for far longer than I have, and there's one particular show that started my interest in anything Brit. A little show called Top Gear. No, not that trash. The classic 2002 to 2015 run of Top Gear. For the uninitiated, Top Gear is a car show run by the BBC where the hosts will look at and review cars of all sorts. What many consider to be the seminal cast of presenters are Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May. They took what could have been a boring, run-of-the-mill review show about automotive transportation and turned it into a weekly get-together of friends, stunts, and silly antics. There was something for everyone to have fun with. Jeremy would say something funny, yet borderline offensive.
What manner of terrible thing has happened under my bonnet? It's actually had diarrhea is what's happened here.
They'd argue about something hilariously pointless and off-topic.
Shall we order Hammond something? I'm thinking of the beer battered fishes, pea puree, tartar sauce and real chip. Don't like beer, I don't like better, I don't like fish.
He doesn't like fish. He doesn't eat fish.
He doesn't fish, I know he doesn't eat fish.
He might eat a free-range egg.
And then get into a crazy situation doing challenges to see which car is best. My family spent years watching the trio of buffoons destroy mobile homes, argue with each other, and generally cause slapsticky mayhem. However, that one day came to a crashing halt.
Controversial Top Gear presenter Jeremy Clarkson has been dropped from the BBC.
What we know is that the producer, Oshin Tiemann, was indeed attacked by Jeremy Clarkson, and he was also subjected to sustained verbal abuse, using words that no one should have to endure.
It follows what the broadcaster referred to as a fracas between Clarkson and a producer. Apparently, no hot food was laid on for the presenter after a day's filming in North Yorkshire.
After Clarkson was let go, Hammond and May resigned in solidarity with their colleague. While what Clarkson did was wrong and the punishment probably just, it was a loss for fans of the trio. Until Amazon came knocking. Premiering in late 2016, the Grand Tour was pretty much Top Gear but on Amazon Prime. Same idiot presenters, same antics, but now they're in a tent.
Well, Jeremy, how would you like to tell the ladies and gentlemen why you decided to put our tent precisely here?
It is exactly here because this spot is exactly halfway between May's house and Hammond's house. So there is no squabbling over who had the longest commute.
Yes, but your house is just over there. I could see it. Just there.
I haven't got a house. You may remember you blew it up.
Oh, all right, your backup house.
Yeah, your spare house is just there.
Let's not get bogged down with whose house is the nearest.
It's yours. Definitely yours. Is that your cat?
The third season recently started airing, and to help market it, they've taken an interesting approach. They've turned it into a video game. When Top Gear was in its heyday, it had a couple different mobile games to play and a downloadable track for Gran Turismo 5, but that's really all they had in terms of gaming options. I used to think that was too bad, since a lot of the kooky challenges they get up to are ripe for creative video game scenarios. Building your own amphibious car and racing across the English Channel or building a rocket out of Reliant Robin sounds like cool ideas for video games on paper, but would those ideas really hold up for a console experience? With the Grand Tour game, I'm still left asking that question. When it was announced, the early previews made it seem like it'd play like a kart racer, not dissimilar to Mario Kart or Mod Nation Racers, but with realistic graphics. What we got is actually a weird combo of kart racing mechanics and racing sims like Gran Turismo or Forza. The premise of the game is simple enough. As a new episode appears on Amazon Prime, a new playable version of that episode is added to the game. The playable version edits the episode down to make a playable narrative with things cut out so there's an incentive to watch the actual episode. If the three presenters are racing three supercars down a Swiss road, you get to play that. If they're trying to fish a truck out of the ocean using winches and cables, you get to play that. In between the gameplay segments, truncated clips from the episode will play to establish a narrative and bridge one gameplay segment to the other. The gameplay segments range anywhere from races to timed laps to other unique features depending on the situations presented. On paper, this sounds like a fine idea, but it doesn't always work in the execution. It really depends on the content featured in the episodes. Speaking of, the game comes preloaded with the first episode of Season 1 and Season 2 to serve as a tutorial, and the rest of the episodes pop up weekly. Going to point out one thing right now, those other episodes are free. There is no paid DLC or microtransactions in this game. Some of the complaints I have with this game, I have with the actual show as well. One of the things is the pacing. You'll play the first half of an adventure where the guys gallivant around and cause trouble, then stop and take a fancy car around the test track at their studio, and then finish the challenge they were working on earlier. This is the way the show is formatted as well. I think it has something to do with viewer retention. Hook the audience in the beginning with a challenge, cut halfway with the promise of more later, do a news segment and car review, then wrap the episode up with the last of the challenge. In terms of the show, I understand why it's like this. If you place the challenge at the beginning of the show, those who only like that part will tune out after that and not watch the rest of the episode. If you place the challenge at the end of the episode, those who don't care about the rest of it will just tune in halfway through or skip forward. By splitting it, you get them to watch the whole episode. Granted, this is a show that's now streamed on the internet where you can skip and fast forward as much as you want, so even then they could still change up the format a bit, but more on that later. For the game, it would work much better if they were to stick the car review at the beginning of the episode and have the challenge featured in one chunk at the end. That way, those who want to play through the goofy antics have to sit through the car review to access it, and you get them to play the whole thing. And it also flows better. For instance, the most recent episode, as of this writing, plays a little awkwardly. The challenge is that the presenters must find a way to sell European-made cars in China, so they show up with some and have to put them through the paces and silly challenges we come to expect.
Now, to do this, we're going to use drones like this one, which have been fitted with flamethrowers. They actually use these in China for clearing litter that's got stuck on overhead power cables.
Right, so how are we going to use airborne flamethrowers like this to test the power and agility of our cars?
Good question. Each of our cars has, as you can see, been fitted with 3 chains of firecrackers. One on the bonnet, one on the roof, one on the boot lid, okay? So you drive around a special course here while you're attacked by the airborne flamethrowers. And then you score a point when you've finished for every one of the targets that haven't gone off.
After a short video segment and a repetitive if funny gameplay segment, it cuts back to the tent. You spend maybe 10 minutes in total watching and playing before it cuts back and the car review starts. You probably spend more time on the car review segment than you do on the challenge portion. After watching the episode, there was at least one other part of the episode that could have been added, where you have to drive at night but are constantly bombarded and blinded with flashes from speed cameras. It's glaringly obvious that a bunch of stuff was cut from the episode because it couldn't be turned into a good game level. Or so the developers think. Now, this game is developed by a brand new studio that's owned by Amazon, simply called Amazon Game Studios. They've made a slew of mobile games before, but never a console experience, so some leeway is probably deserved here. What they do well, they actually do well. At its core, this needs to be a driving game, and it does that well. Each car actually handles differently, so you can't blindly take 2 cars around the same test track and expect the same results. You have to learn how each car handles and react accordingly, like an actual car. If a presenter complains that a car is hard to handle in the show, then that car will be hard to handle. That goes far in making the gameplay at least feel like you're doing something unique each time, even if it is actually a little repetitive. However, it still doesn't spice up the gameplay enough. While driving is and should be the main focus of the gameplay, there's so many opportunities for fun minigames that it's a waste that they don't actually have them in there. For instance, in the Columbia special, the guys go about modifying their cars. In the actual game, you see them say, "We should modify our cars," and then have them modify their cars. A fun minigame would be helping with the modifications, screwing things in, hammering out dents, doing some quick painting. Nothing too involved, but something just quick and interesting enough to make it feel like you're participating in the events of the show. As is, it feels more like you're watching the show with quick interruptions of gameplay than really playing it. That's too bad, really, because there's good concepts here, but there's not quite enough to sustain it. The Columbia special and the following episode are probably the best 2 of the bunch, because they managed to capitalize on the things happening. There isn't just driving, there's also picture taking and precarious bridge hanging to spice things up. The following episode ends with a shooting gallery where you have to shoot targets from the back of a moving truck. Adding a few more things like that per episode will really help the fun factor. Although sometimes the content of a few episodes just doesn't really lend itself to too much variety. One episode featured essentially 3 car reviews back to back to back. The only thing that stopped it being a bore to watch or play was the final review where Richard Hammond essentially made a mini documentary on the life of a racing car driver named Jim Clark. I'd never heard of him before, but it was emotionally poignant enough to give me the sniffles. For playing that documentary, the screen format changed from color to black and white to simulate the footage from the time frame Clark was racing. Having already seen the episode, the change in color, or rather lack thereof, really put me in that car seat and helped with the immersion, something video games can excel at when done right. The Grand Tour game has the potential to do fun and interesting things with its gameplay, it's just a matter of whether it will be able to or not. While some people might be ready to write this game off as a half-baked cash grab, let's not do so quite yet. The dev team has been focused on making the tie-in episodes of Season 3 of the show, and the categories for Season 1 and 2 on the game only have the first episode of each season in them to play. Once the team is done with Season 3, they could go back and do the other episodes for those seasons to add more content to the game. There's also the future. Before Season 3 started, it was announced that this would be the last studio-based season of the Grand Tour. An end of an era for these three presenters, since they've been doing this together for 17 years or so. We're going to get more Grand Tour in the future, but it's going to be more focused on specials instead of reviews or news. In all honesty, for both the show and the potential future of this game, that's probably actually for the best. The specials are easily the best episodes of both Top Gear and the Grand Tour, as they turn into great globe-trotting, hilarious adventures filled with hijinks and other tomfoolery that you can only get when the presenters are out of their element. Traveling to distant lands like the North Pole or Vietnam also adds unpredictability to the episode, as you never know what could go wrong and when. If in the future we get 3 of these specials a year, that gives the production team of both the show and game sides to come up with lots of fun and exciting content for us to enjoy. There's also a 4-player racing mode with more traditional kart racer mechanics, but I haven't touched that as I don't have anyone to play with. So we come to the final verdict. What's the best deal for this game? Well, I've had a hard time trying to come up with a verdict for this one. I always say what a game is worth, and the full price usually means that it's a great game. Take, for instance, a game like Spider-Man PS4. That game was easily worth the $60 it cost to buy that game at launch. It was a great game and it justified its price point. The Grand Tour game, as much as I enjoy it, I hesitate to call a good game. Since it's not a great game, can I give it the recommendation of a full price? The Star Wars Battlefront EA games I have enjoyed tremendously, but couldn't recommend for anything more than $45 because of all their faults. They weren't worth $60. The Grand Tour game isn't worth $60 either, but that's not its asking price. The asking price for this game is just $15. That's less than what it would cost to buy a new Blu-ray movie or a deluxe Transformer nowadays. It's a super cheap game and you sorta get what you pay for with that price point. I'm going to go ahead and say that it's worth the $15, but add in the caveat that this is a game for fans of Top Gear or the Grand Tour. It's not a game for fans of realistic racing sims. It's not a game for fans of kart racers either, since it actually has some complex gameplay to it at times. This is a game for people that want another way to experience the hilarity that these three can offer, and the game excels at that. In-jokes and Easter eggs that only longtime fans will recognize are present, and jokes that are funny in the show can be amplified by the gameplay. For instance, to test the strength of trucks, the guys have to use them to pull down giant statues of themselves. May Clarkson's go down easy, but then we get the reveal of Hammond's.
And there we are.
Oh, now come on!
You can then barely tap the controls to pull over the statue and end the gameplay segment almost instantly.
I've won another test!
So the Grand Tour game might not be that grand, but it has its audience and it plays to that audience as well as it can. So I would recommend picking it up if you're a fan, but other than that, you can probably pass it on by.
What is that?
It's a bird call.
It's a duck! Moments later, though, there was an even worse noise.
Oh, God.
Jesus.
If only there was something tall and metal that would attract the lightning.
Not wishing to be fried, I quickly descended.